Hey everybody, these are the reading notes for week one. Um, it, I will be going over the Star Spangled Banner, Chief Red Jacket's speech, and then the two chapters from the Rose Walden called Where I Lived and What I Lived For and the Bean Field. If you have not read these yet, I would strongly advise you to stop this video and go through and read them first because some of this stuff is not really going to make sense unless you have read the text. Okay, if you have read the text and you feel that you are confused about meaning, hopefully this presentation will kind of fill in some of those gaps for you. Okay, so to begin, I think it's appropriate to begin American literature with the Star Spangled Banner. After all, it is our national anthem, and I think there are some things about it that people do not know, even though it's such a widely known song or anthem. So to begin, uh, something that you may not know is that in 1773, the song, so the musical notes for the song was created by a man named John Stafford Smith. And it was actually created to be an English, as in from England, drinking song, which is somewhat appropriate considering it is our national anthem and a symbol of pride for our country. And then it wasn't until 1814 that Francis Scott Key assigned the lyrics or the words to the song um, and put it all together. But it took a long time, not even 100 years ago, for it to be declared as our official national anthem by then President Herbert Hoover. So it took a long time. It's not like 1776, whenever we became independent, that's when it started and it was our national anthem. It took a long time to become what it is known as today. Something also that I think is important is to understand what the word anthem actually means. Anthem is defined as a rousing song of praise. Um, so the word rousing means to get people up, get people excited, uh, to have like a strong sense of pride. And then song of praise, meaning to praise our country. So a national anthem is meant to spark uh, a strong sense of pride and um, um, excitedness and strength for our country. Okay. Um, like I said, I'm not going to read this to you. I hope that you have read it by now. Surely you are familiar with the first stanza. Something that may be new to you is that the Star Spangled Banner, we only sing about 25% of it. And the 75% of it we leave off. And a lot of people don't even know that those other three stanzas exist. But there are a few things that I wanted to point out. Specifically in line 3, you have the words perilous fight. And I think that it's important for you to understand what fight exactly they are talking about. So we have a man named George Armistead, and he was the commander at Fort Henry, and he actually ordered a flag so large that the British would have no difficulty seeing it from a distance, meaning that they wanted the British to be able to see our flag. It was a symbol of ownership, independence, strength, all of that. And before going into the Battle of Baltimore during the War of 1812, George Armistead wanted, kind of to stand up and be strong as a country, as a united country. And that's when that's the battle that specifically that he's talking about in the song, that perilous fight, the Battle of Baltimore during the War of 1812. And then this whole idea of having this huge flag as a symbol of strength kind of goes with our national anthem as a symbol of strength and pride as well. And then we have the land of the free, obviously, in line 8 is referring to America's independence from Britain. And then a few lines down in line 10, we have the line that says, the foe's haughty host in dread silent reposes. This is a really old text. So, back then they spoke in a way that's a little bit different than we speak today. And so I wanted to kind of point out a couple of these things just to try to clarify what exactly is being talked about. And so this line means that they were just waiting on the results from the attack. And then most, not importantly, but most interestingly, I guess you would say, in lines 21 through 22, these are the words that most people. So, okay, let me back up. We only sing the first stanza of the song, right? Why is that? Why do we not sing the rest of it? Is it too long? Is it hard to remember? Are the words too complicated for modern day people to read, understand, and then speak? Maybe all of that could be our possible reasons. But there's also a belief that there's racism, um, signs, symbols, meanings of racism in this song. And I think that most people, whenever they make that claim, um, the specific lines that they're referring to would be lines 21 through 22, and I've put them here. So we have the words, no refuge could save the hireling enslaved from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. Um, Something that you need to know is that whenever America was fighting the British actually encouraged the slaves, the American slaves, to join their side. And in return, if they would join them in the fight, and then they also had the Native Americans on their side as well, if they would join their fight, the British promised them freedom. Uh, and then the Americans saw this as an act against Christianity because at the time slavery was widely accepted, and it was at that time people thought it was a good thing, it was the right thing to do. Obviously, we know now that that is absolutely not the case, and our nation has come a long way since then. So these are the controversial lines in the Star Spangled Banner. And so something that I want you to think about is, do you believe that those lines are appropriate? They do represent a really black truth, or really dark truth about our country. Slavery did happen. I don't think anybody is going to say that it didn't happen. It absolutely did. It was wrong. I don't really know anybody that thinks that it wasn't wrong. And so the question is, should we sing those lines? Obviously, our nation thinks that we shouldn't. We should just leave them out. But then there's also the question of, does this song deserve to still be our national anthem? So I want you to think about that. Obviously, there are cases to be made on both sides of the argument. And there are no wrong answers here. I just want to give you something to think about. The Star Spangled Banner does represent our history. It's meant to be, like I said, a rousing song of praise, to have pride in our country. And I think it's also very relevant to talk about this debate that's happening in our country as well. And so here's the information, and I want you to kind of think about what you believe, and don't be afraid of, some students in the past have been afraid of having an opinion that may or may not be different from mine. Don't worry about that. There are no wrong answers. I just want you to form an opinion, whatever that may be. Okay. And so I have some questions down here for you to consider. First of all, why are we leaving out those stanzas? Do you think they should be left out? Why are we keeping the anthem? Why does it remain our national anthem? Should we change that? And then think about what makes us truly free as a people. Those first three questions, I just kind of want you to be thinking on your own. I think it will help you on discussion board assignments, written assignments, things that are coming, just to have some targeted thinking. But this last question, what makes us truly free as a people? Obviously, we have our Constitution that outlines the rules and freedoms that we are to abide by in this country. Uh, but I also think that there's an element that we don't talk about, or that isn't talked about very often, that adds to our freedom. The fact that our country is constantly trying to better itself. We're trying to better our rules, which is why we have so many amendments to the Constitution. Um, we're trying to better ourselves, better our rules, make it. We're always in this cycle of improvement. And I think that as we improve ourselves as a society, as a government, as people, that makes us more free. That we have this ability to recognize the faults in our system, the faults in our belief systems, in our governmental system, and our societal systems. And the fact that we can recognize these faults and make changes for improvement, I think add to our sense of freedom and what it truly means to be an American. So I want you to think about all of that in your studies of the Star Spangled Banner, and I really look forward to talking to you guys about that. Okay, so moving on, we're going to move on to Chief Red Jacket's speech um, as he is defending Native American religion. I do want to give you a little bit of background. Let me make sure I'm not forgetting something first. Okay, so the first paragraph of the document that I've posted kind of gives you that historical background so you can understand kind of what was going on during the time. So this speech was given in 1805. So we know that America gained its independence from Britain in 1776, obviously. So this is about 30-ish years later. And there's still that conflict between Native Americans and Americans, or the Native Americans and the white people. And I think that this conflict has, like all things, has made progress, but I don't think there's a defined time where we were able to officially fix this problem, I guess you would say, because we still have some of these issues today. But I think his speech is an excellent representation of a response of a calm, thoughtful response to a very it could be a very controversial, something that causes conflict, a problem. It really could be a problem. Okay, so just a little bit of background. Remember, like I said, the British kind of encouraged the Native Americans to join forces with them during the war. And some of them did. And because of that, obviously, there's going to be some conflict between the white people, the Americans, and then the Native Americans. And so Chief Red Jacket, being a Seneca, he was a mediator in between the relationship between the government, the white man government, and then the Native Americans. And so he did a lot of things that, like Chief Red Jacket led the delegation and met with George Washington in 1792. He actually received a peace medal and was depicted, like in this photo that I have here, as being a prominent Indian leader. So he kind of had a reputation as being a mediator in very heated, I guess you would say, situations. And I think that after you read and understand his speech, you'll understand why, because he's very, very good at it, very well spoken, but he also gets his very forceful point across at the same time. Okay, so in 1805, as well as before 1805 and then after 1805, there was this push by the white men and the government to try to convert the Native Americans to Christianity. We still have missionaries today that go all over the country, all over the world, trying to convert others and try to spread the belief of Christianity and spread the word of God and try to show everybody, that this new way of thinking, this new faith, and try to, I guess, spread it all over the world. And so during this time, that's what they were trying to do. And so a white missionary, was sent to the Native American land of the Senecas in trying to, in hopes of converting these Native Americans to Christianity. And this speech is basically the Native American response. This is what they think about becoming Christians. Okay. So like I said before, I'm not going to read this to you. Excuse me. This weather has me my allergies. So I'm not going to read it to you. I think that after you read it, it's clear that they do not plan to convert to Christianity. And I think that he does a really good job of explaining why. So I want you to think about a speech, if you've ever written a speech before, or an argument, like an argumentative paper, or even a debate. How can you be most effective in doing that? Obviously, you have to give a thesis. You have to explain your point, your what word am I looking for? Your stance on it. He does this. He does this very clearly in the beginning. He says, I want to make sure that you understand before I even start on this that I am speaking for all of my people. We speak as one. So there's no sense. I think he did that to make it clear that there's no point in trying to talk to anybody else, because I am their leader. We all have a shared opinion about this, and there's no point in trying to take it to another person. So he has his stance very clearly in the beginning, and then he kind of uses each one of these paragraphs as a separate, distinct point as support for what he's saying. No, we have no intentions of becoming or converting to Christianity, and this is why. And he has, 12 different points, and all of them have merit. And I think he does a really good job of emphasizing why. He includes things like counter arguments, history, specific things that have happened in history, and then compares how the Native American people are with the white people. And all of this kind of goes together in his very well-spoken defense of his Native American religion. So I think it's really important. He does repeat the word brother at the beginning of every paragraph. I think that that's really interesting, because if you can note in his tone, he is very calm, but he is also very firm. Like there's no point in you trying to convince us, because this is how we feel. So he's very firm, almost I don't know not really sarcastic, but he's very adamant in his tone and in his beliefs. And I think he does this really well. But he uses that word brother, I think, as a way of stating equality, meaning that you don't have any control over me, but at the same time that he doesn't have any control over them, that they are equals, and as equals, they have the right to believe in whatever they want to believe in. That the white people have no business forcing their religion on the Native Americans, and then the Native Americans have no right to force their religion of the Great Spirit onto the white people. So I think it goes both ways, but I think it's really interesting that he uses that word brother to kind of lighten the tone as he gives very, very forceful points in his response. Okay. I want you to consider these questions at the bottom. Um, Obviously, the purpose of the speech was to give his message. Do you think he was successful? Yes or no? Do you think it was well done? Do you think, what kind of effect do you think it has? Obviously, at the beginning of that of his speech, in that paragraph of information, it says that Red Jacket's forceful defense of native religion below caused the representative to refuse the Indians' handshake and announce that no fellowship could exist between the religion of God and the works of the devil. So that suggests that it didn't go well, right? That the white man left angry almost. So I want you to think about the tone of this speech. Does it warrant anger? Does it seem like he was angry, even though he's very forceful? Does he seem angry? I don't think so. I think he seems very calm, but also very firm in his beliefs. And then I want you to think about freedom, like we talked about before. Does this speech promote or diminish freedom? So, what does it mean to be free? Um, we live by what they would call back then white man's law and white man's government. That's the way that we live our life in modern day society. And this speech, how does that how does it relate to freedom as we see it? Because I think it's really important. Okay, so that's it for the speech. If you are getting tired of listening to the sound of my voice, I get tired of listening to the sound of my voice, so that's completely understandable. Feel free to pause or, shut it down and come back to it later. If you do want to come back to it later, you can always just move the video thing to where you can see the beginning of the next slide. So that way, you can skip over all of the stuff that you've already listened to. I'm sure you know how to do this already. I'm just giving you, a little bit of help if you're getting tired, because the next part's going to be long as well. Okay, so now moving into Transcendentalism and Thoreau and the 2 chapters from his book called Walden. Transcendentalism is a really long word, but it's not as complicated as some people may think. But I do want to make sure that you kind of understand what it means and how it relates to what we're reading. So Transcendentalism is kind of like a literary belief or a literary era, where a lot of writers during a certain time were writing about the same kinds of things with the same kinds of messages. Okay, so it's kind of a way of thought or a mode of thought by a lot of different authors. So this whole idea of transcendentalism was founded in New England, so in America, in 1836. So not too long after the Star Spangled Banner, and then after Chief Red Jacket's speech. This way of thinking was kind of a reaction to rationalism. So people being rational about things. This is the response to people being rational about things, and maybe that'll make a little bit more sense here in a minute. So the idea of transcendentalism teaches that divinity pervades nature and humanity. Divinity meaning the divine, or God, basically, pervades nature and humanity. So God and faith and a belief system like that is way more important than nature and humanity, and it will always come first, basically. Okay, or you can find the divine or faith or God within nature and within humanity. Many transcendentalists believe that the advancements of society and institutions corrupted the purity of the individual, meaning that the more and more people bought into how society was progressing and buying into all of these rules of the government, the more an individual is taken away. It takes away your uniqueness, your own individual way of thinking, and it kind of corrupts you. Um, that may sound like a conspiracy theory. A lot of people might say that about the transcendentalists, but that's what they believed. Um, the transcendentalists also believe that people should maintain their individuality, self reliance, and independence no matter what. So, no matter what everybody else is doing or what the government says we should do, you should still be a free thinking, individual, unique person. I think that there's a lot of honor in believing, in believing that, because that's what makes us free, right? Remember, we're talking before, or I was talking, you were listening, about what really does make us free, and the idea of recognizing faults in our system and within society um, kind of gives us that freedom to change it and to better ourselves and to constantly be making improvements as we go. Okay, so obviously the transcendentalists also rejected materialism. So needing to have more and more things and to keep up with having the latest and the greatest. There are other transcendentalist authors that you may or may not recognize. So we are going to be studying Henry David Thoreau, obviously, but there's a guy, Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was much more well known actually than Thoreau, and a lot of people feel that Emerson was like the founder of transcendentalism. So those two guys are pretty much the top guys of this way of believing. But then you also had a couple of other people like Margaret Fuller, Theodore Parker, and Louisa May Alcott. So if you've ever heard of any of those people, they're all what we would call transcendentalists, and we're all writing and thinking about the same things. So Thoreau himself, he was born in Concord, Massachusetts, and lived between 1817 and 1862. So he wrote Walden towards the end of his life. He basically stayed in Massachusetts and around that area. So everything that he writes is kind of centered on what was going on there during that time. His family was, interestingly enough, in the pencil making business, which I find to be very appropriate that he turned out to be a writer. He did attend Harvard and was receiving an education for a master's degree from there, but didn't actually graduate. Whenever he finished his education and he was going to attend what we would call a graduation, they asked him to pay $5 for his diploma, which $5 would have been more money than what it is now. But he was asked to pay for his diploma. So in addition to paying for his education, he had to pay for this, and he didn't believe in that, so he just didn't pay for it. So technically, he did not receive his degree for this reason. And I think that a lot of it is because of his transcendentalist beliefs that, should we be paying to be educated? Should I have to pay you to give me a piece of paper for knowing something? Why do I need a piece of paper to prove that I know what I know? Is it not enough to just know it? Right? So these are the kind of questions that he might have been asking at that time. So Thoreau himself is obviously a believer in simple living, but also communing with nature. Usually we use that word commune in a religious sense. And I think that he, like the other transcendentalists, find his faith, find his belief in the divine within nature. He was very good friends with Emerson. Emerson had established like a newspaper journal type thing that he wrote for called The Dial. And the other writers that I mentioned before, Thoreau, Emerson, Margaret Fuller, Parker, Alcott, all of them were writers. They were friends with each other, thinking about, talking about, writing about the same kinds of things. And they all published their work in the Dial. And later on, Thoreau created his most well-known work, his novel called Walden. Walden was meant to be an experiment of Thoreau's, and he wrote about it while he lived there. Basically, what he did was he moved out to this place called Walden Pond. It's a real place. You can go see it outside of Concord, Massachusetts today. The background on this is the pond. It's a real place, so he actually did it. He built himself a little cabin there at Walden Pond, and he lived there. And that was kind of his experience or his experiment to see kind of how he changed himself as living away from society. What how does it change your thoughts, your way of looking at things, and your perspective, I guess, on society and government and all of that stuff, to live kind of that life of seclusion away from modern world. And that's kind of what he did. And so Walden is a pretty long book, and I'm only wanting you to read just certain chapters. So the first one is called Where I Lived and What I Lived For, and it's exactly what the title says. He talks about where he lived at Walden Pond and what he was living for. It's very specific. If hopefully you've read this already, you will have noticed that Thoreau's writing style is very dense. Like I said earlier, they spoke differently than we do now, and so it almost seems like it's in a different form of our language, which it is. So that kind of makes it hard to understand sometimes. I don't want you to be too worried, I guess you would say, about understanding every single line, because it's just different. Life then was different than it is now. Words were different. Um, but I want you to focus on the big picture, the big purposes, the big ideas, and I've listed a lot of those here as well. So I'm not going to read all of these to you, but I kind of pointed out the big ideas from the chapter that you need to be. These are the ones that I really want you to focus on and understand as you are understanding what he was doing there, and why he was doing it. So on in my page 81, it says that the present was my next experiment. He saw this whole experience there as being an experiment. So what is it going to do to me and my belief system and my thinking whenever I leave modern society to go live a life of seclusion in the woods? So it was an experiment, and he just kind of wrote about it as he went. He says on my page 82 that he found himself suddenly neighbor to the birds. Um, I think the word neighbor is very interesting because it signifies a sense of equality, that he doesn't see birds as being animals or being lesser than him, but as being neighbors, that they live there together in harmony, I guess you would say. He says that even though his little cabin was really small, he did not feel crowded or confined, that nature kind of gave him that sense of openness and that space that he needs to exist, but also the space that he needs to think. He says on my page 86 that he got up early and bathed in the pond. He saw that as being a religious exercise and one of the best things in which he did. Obviously, he's going to need to bathe every day. That's something that all humans should do. Um, but I want you to think about his comparison of that to being a religious exercise, because what kind of religious exercise do we do in the water? Baptism, right? And think about what the purpose of baptism is. Why do they do that at church? What is the overall meaning of it? And then what does it mean that he would be baptizing himself every single day, renewing himself and his beliefs and in his faith every single day, to have that clarity and that sense of freedom of thought, I guess you would say. Let me see. I'm going to skip down to this kind of longer line on my pages 87 through 88. The millions are awake enough for physical labor, but only 1 in a million is awake enough for effective intellectual exertion. Only 1 in 100 millions to a poetic or divine life. To be awake is to be alive. I have never yet met a man who was quite awake. How could I have looked him in the face? What he's saying here is that people are like robots. You know, you go through your life every day in your routine, you do the same thing over and over and over again. And it is rare to find somebody that is truly awake, truly thinking about what they're doing in their life. Does this really matter? What is the purpose of life? How am I living out my purpose of life? All of those kinds of things. And I think it's a really interesting thing to think about, because we all tend to get into that cycle, that that sense of just doing the same things every single day and not really thinking about truly living and what it really all means. Which goes into his line here on page 88. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately. So, not to live in that robotic cycle, but to deliberately enjoy and appreciate every single day. And I think that he thinks that the key to that is to live simply, which obviously living within nature allows us to do that. On page 90, he says, we do not ride on the railroad, it rides upon us. The railroad at that time would have been a modern thing. It would have been a way for society to make things faster, obviously, mass production and all of that. But it's also a modern thing. So, and people would ride on the railroad, obviously. But so I think that it's more of a symbol of modernism and modern technology and progress in the world, and that we do not use progress, progress uses us. And I think that that's a very deep thing to be thinking about. Let's see. Skip over the rest of that. A lot of the stuff is kind of repetition of the same ideas, but make sure that you're reading all of these lines and really, really understanding what they mean and how it contributes to his overall message. So skipping from that chapter to the final text for this week, we have Thoreau's Bean Field. Like you, probably, whenever I very first read this, I thought that the bean field seemed like a very strange inclusion in this book. He says things like, I came to love my rows, my beans, like he had a deep relationship with his beans. It's a very strange thing to say, right? I mean, I think it probably would have been a strange thing to say back then, whenever he was writing, to have this deep, thoughtful relationship with your beans. But the further that I got into it, I came to realize that yes, he was talking about beans, but he was also using that as a metaphor to describe a bigger thing. And I think once you make that connection to that big picture idea, it makes a lot more sense. He says on my page 150, what shall I learn of beans or beans of me? I cherish them, I hoe them early and late, I have an eye to them, and this is my day's work. It goes back to him saying that he wants to live simply and to kind of cut out all of that unnecessary things about life in order to truly live deliberately and cherish every single day. He talks about the ancient people that had lived there before, obviously talking about the Native Americans. So he's bringing that in there, and how white men have cleared the land. And when you clear the land, you kind of modernize it for, for colonization, or, some version of modern living. And it seems to me that he's making a connection to Native Americans and the way that they live, and there's a certain level of respect there. Even though Thoreau is a white man living in a white man's world, he does respect the way that the Native Americans lived, and he can kind of see that that extinct way of life here at Walden Pond in his bean field. Let's see. I think that he talks about just the work that you have to put into a bean field. You do all of this work, and you literally get a crop from it. You get to see the seeds sprout of your hard work, and you kind of grow an appreciation for that simple life and the work that you put into it. Skipping down to page 159, why concern ourselves so much about our beans for seed and not be concerned at all about a new generation of men? He does talk quite a bit in this chapter about how farming itself has modernized, trying to make it faster, more productive, and you kind of cut out all of the appreciation that you get from hard work and investing so much time and effort into something. And he says that by modernizing, you're changing, you're creating a new generation of man. Is that really what we want? Once again, a deep idea that deserves some thought. Next, he says, our ambassadors should be instructed to send home such seeds as these, and Congress help distribute them all over the land. So this kind of brings me to discussing the metaphor. Think about seeds as being an idea. You plant these ideas, you harvest them, you put a lot of work into these ideas, and then they grow, right? And they spread. If you can plant these ideas of a simple way of life, maintaining your own individuality, being self-reliant, if you plant these seeds within the ground or within the people, they will grow. And so he's saying for Congress and government to plant these seeds within people, and therefore we can create a better society. Okay, so when you think about it like that, it kind of makes his statement of becoming more intimate with his beings a little more understandable, because at first it's a very strange thing to say, but then I think once you get the metaphor, it makes a lot more sense. Okay, so that's about it for that. As you were thinking about those two chapters, I want you to think about why he was writing it down. Yeah, he went out there for an experiment, but was it not enough to just go and experience it and to learn all of that about himself? Why did he write it down? What is his purpose? What message is he trying to send to his readers? And then do you see evidence of society taking this advice? I think that there's an argument to be made on both sides of that question. But I want you to at least have that thought. Okay. If you need Works Cited page, or these are the citations for the files that I have given you, the PDFs for this week. So if you ever need them, you can refer back to this Works Cited page and borrow them if you would like. That concludes this week's reading notes. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I hope that I've given you some things to think about and consider as we go forward in this class. And I will talk to you guys on the next video.